Now that the 2023 NBA season has finally come to a close, it's time to rank the game's best players. Before we get into putting a number on these guys though, I think it's really important to lay out my criteria and the things I value so that everyone's on the same page. The question I'm trying to answer is, if I'm trying to contend for a championship, who's going to offer the most value at that level? This means that complementary skills are really important as the team gets better. Things like how quick of a decision maker or error prone a player is, how good they are at playing off the ball, and how their game can translate to multiple different schemes, approaches, and rosters on both ends of the floor. This also means that I'm very heavily focused on what a player can do in the playoffs, but meaningful sample sizes for some of these guys are hard to come by. So I'll look at those numbers with a grain of salt, but I'm a lot more interested in the different skill sets, tendencies, and the sort of counters they offer against different opponents. Some of these guys don't have any games played in the postseason at all, so it's important to keep in mind that as I go through my list, a lot of it is built on theory, speculation, and projection. I'm just one mind, and this is my best attempt at tackling these rankings. I considered 36 different players for a spot on this list, and although the 11 that just missed the cut won't have video profiles, as soon as the series is wrapped up, I'll also be releasing a breakdown on those players to members of my website, along with evaluations of 50 or so total players from the season, so if you're interested in checking that out, you can find the link in the description. That's where you can also find timestamps to easily skip around and jump to each ranking, or just come back to a specific profile. Lastly, I want to make it known that I'm only looking at when these players are on the court and playing. Injuries weren't heavily considered unless they clearly impacted that player's performance come playoff time. To save everyone from having to watch a documentary on my basketball opinions, I split this project up into 5 different videos, and in that last episode I'll also look at how my list would change had I considered health. I think that pretty much clears everything up. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. And without further ado, let's get to the rankings. Starting the list at 25, I've got Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards is an absolutely ridiculous athlete. He's big and strong with one of the most explosive first steps I've ever seen. He routinely beats the first line of defense on drives, can finish over help down low due to his extreme vertical pop, and has a great game on the floor to shed defenders with timely strides, changes of speed, and the use of some crafty angles. It's really tough for defenses to prevent him from getting to the rim, and he rarely settles, in attack mode at all times. This has its benefits and its drawbacks. Of course, it applies a ton of pressure to the most efficient scoring zone on the floor, but he can also get tunnel vision and launch himself into some weird offense. Regardless, he's a strong finisher. That combination of size and strength allows him to protect the ball and score through contact, while being capable of adjusting his shot in mid-air. He pairs this slashing with some nice off-the-dribble three-point shooting, and these skills work together. The threat of his drives opens up the perimeter, while his outside scoring helps open up lanes to the cup, which gives his attack multiple dimensions. Still, his scoring is slightly limited by his lack of a true in-between game. He rarely pulls up for jumpers out of drives, and doesn't really use the floater, which means he often has to take and make tougher shots, putting a cap on his efficiency. Despite this, he still consistently puts the defense into rotation, which opens up opportunities as a playmaker. This is an area of his game that has continuously improved, especially with how he uses pace. A lot more patience coming off of screens, or when breaking down his man in isolation, and he's got some nice passes in his bag, especially with the offhand, which adds more versatility. He still doesn't have great vision, and isn't a super quick decision maker, missing some reads, and not yet comfortably taking advantage of small windows. He also has a tendency to telegraph his passes, and isn't the most accurate on his deliveries, so when given more touches, he will turn the ball over at a pretty decent rate. Still, he's got some legit on-ball value, some playmaking chops to go along with his explosive scoring, but not enough to where I'd say he's capable of being the primary creator on a contender just yet. He makes up some of that ground by having value away from the ball as well. I think he lacks feel in terms of knowing where and when to move or position himself, but he can be a sharp cutter, is a good enough shooter to space the floor and demand closeouts, and absolutely destroys defenses off the catch with his explosive driving. You sprinkle in the fact that he's also really effective in the open floor, and I think that makes him an all-star level offensive player. But what about the other side of the ball? His tools and athleticism are real, and some of the flashes are insane, having stretches of lockdown perimeter D, legit switchability, and even some high-level rim protection. These mean a lot for future projections, but I still think it's a bit early to call him a really good defender. His technique needs some work both on and off the ball, having some lapses in judgment that occasionally cause breakdowns, but I think he's bought in enough to provide positive value, and you pair that with his offense to get an all-star level player. Coming in at 24, I've got Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren Jackson of course makes his mark on the defensive end, where he's primarily utilized as a sort of free safety. He's a super rangy athlete that can cover a ton of ground due to his agility, 7'4" wingspan, and active hands. He's a high anticipation, positionally aware off-ball defender who's constantly moving and rotating to turn away the biggest threats, while being mobile enough to recover to the perimeter with some high-level closeouts. He can play the numbers game as well as anyone. Because of how good he is at saving plays on the backline, Memphis is able to give up advantages at the point of attack, and this is fueled by his ability to protect the rim. He's an all-time great shot blocker, sending away nearly 4 shots every 75 possessions this season, and he really has it all when it comes to timing, targeting the ball, and quickly leaping off the floor to meet attackers vertically. Over the past 2 seasons, players are shooting almost 14% worse than their expected accuracy at the rim when he's there, and that sort of paint protection can really change an offense. I do think he still chases blocks just a bit too much at times, getting faked off the floor or needlessly fouling, but he has gotten a lot more disciplined since even just last year, staying on his feet or going vertical without taking swipes at the ball. He also isn't quite the same deterrent as other major paint protectors. By the nature of his role, he's not a guy who's going to position himself in a way that prevents shots from getting to the rim, and he just isn't as big or strong as traditional centers. He also isn't a very good defensive rebounder, which I think limits his value at the 5. At his best, next to a guy like Steven Adams who can help close possessions. Still, he offers incredible versatility, switching onto all types of different players and offering resistance, executing any type of pick and roll coverage as the big, and because of how well he covers ground and the amount of different things he can do, he really bolsters the scheme flexibility of his squad, which is what the playoffs are all about. I do think some of his limitations just hold him back from the very top of the league, but he's still one of the very best playoff defenders in the game, offering all-star level value on that end. His offense is really interesting, as there really isn't a player like him. He adds some value as a shooter, where he's not just stationed in the corner like a lot of other 4s, but legit running off of screens, playing the pick and pop, and hitting above the break from extended range. He's not someone who can just be left open and helped off of, spacing the floor, and he's capable of attacking off the catch. He's a decent slasher and finisher who's very good at drawing fouls, using his body extremely well. He also abuses mismatches in the post and on the offensive glass with physicality, but bigger defenders tend to give him a lot of trouble, as he doesn't have many inside scoring counters outside of bully ball. Because of this, his scoring can be very one-dimensional at times. He has a nice float game, but doesn't have the best touch around the rim, and only wants to use his left hand. I think an unfavorable matchup against AD and the Lakers made his scoring look just a little worse than it actually is, but he's also by far the worst passer of anyone I considered. Defenses can collapse on him in the paint without penalty, forcing him into either taking really tough shots or turning the ball over. All things considered, I do think of him as a slight negative on offense in the playoffs, but with a more optimistic view, could see him being a positive in a more favorable environment. But his defense still keeps him an all-star level player, and my choice at 24. Next up at 23 is James Harden. Over the years, he's definitely lost a lot of his burst and ability to change speeds, but is still very good at getting into the defense due to his handle, first step, pace, and how he uses size to create with contact. With that said, his lift is completely gone. He can't finish vertically, the floater is ineffective, and he's not as shifty on the floor with his strides, so the threat of his inside scoring is cooked. Just in the regular season, he was a guy who's consistently hovered around 56% within 10 feet, and since the hamstring injury in 2021, that's taken a noticeably steep decline, without even considering the fact that it's on less than half the volume. Because of this, he's often driving with the sole intention of passing, which defenses can key in on come playoff time and not feel the same sort of pressure. Since 2021, he's attempted just 3 shots at the rim per 75 possessions in the postseason, something that used to be a staple in his attack. But one way he sort of adjusted to this is by going to the mid-range a lot more, which has helped him. And that's a big deal because he is still one of the game's best off-the-dribble shooters, with elite space creation, tough shot making, and that threat still leaves him a real strong isolation scorer, who will attack mismatches if given to him. He still gets to the line at a decent rate, but again, nowhere near as much as he once did. So, as we've seen with his inconsistency, when the shot isn't falling, his scoring can be dreadful. The volume is nowhere near what it once was, but hot shooting performances have kept him from being really inefficient, and he still creates more than enough for himself to open up opportunities as a playmaker. Now, this is where almost all of his value comes at this point. He's got incredible vision and anticipation, is patient in his decision making and a master of manipulating the defense, and makes sharp reads while keeping his turnover rates relatively low, just efficiently making plays. He's more than willing to take risks, looking to create layups and corner threes as much as possible, and has a deep bag of passes to make it happen, including lobs, shovels in either direction, and of course his classic drive-and kick game. That level of passing ability with just some scoring threat still leaves him a really valuable offensive player on the ball, even with how volatile his scoring production can be. And I even think he's okay off the ball at this point. He's a great spot-up shooter, and although he's not an active mover, is smart with his positioning and has feel for finding soft spots in the defense. I also think he's done a better job of playing off the catch than in years past, making quick decisions to drive or make the extra pass instead of stopping the ball for isolations. And this entire package, in my opinion, leaves him a high-level all-star or maybe even low All-NBA offensive player. As for his defense, I find it relatively insignificant. A loss of foot speed leaves him even more vulnerable on the perimeter than he once was, but he still has size and length that help give him some solid switch ability. He uses that length pretty well off the ball, keeping his hands active as a helper and offering resistance on drives, but motor and consistency in these spots are a problem, and he's a guy who can be hunted on the perimeter or in the pick and roll. For these reasons, I do view him as a negative, but not to the point where constructing a strong playoff defense around him is a problem, which brings him down just a bit, but still a solid all-star nonetheless. At 22, I've got Jamal Murray. This was a tale of 2 seasons for Jamal. He spent a majority of the regular season playing himself back into shape and integrating back into the system, but man did he explode come playoff time. This may sound strong, but he's genuinely one of the best shooters I've ever seen, an elite 3-point shot maker with an extremely versatile shot diet consisting of pull-ups, step-backs, side steps, off of movement, you name it and he probably does it. He also has all of these things in the mid-range, and it's not like he's some unreal space creator, making shots through and over the defense like it's nothing. That threat as a shooter helps open up driving lanes, where he's a pretty good downhill attacker. He's really big for a lead guard and has an elite handle, which means he can get to the paint pretty well, a skill that's obviously maximized by Denver's spacing. His arsenal as a finisher is vast, going to all types of different layups and floaters, and if we take a look at how his scoring stacked up during these playoffs, he's above average efficiency on pretty solid volume. I will say he relies a bit too much on tough looks, and his shot selection at times can be questionable. He also doesn't get to the line as much as some other primary scoring options, so even in such a favorable situation like the Nuggets, it's likely he won't put together incredibly efficient runs. Despite that, he is still a very effective 3-level scorer, and really knows how to pressure the defense, where he can take advantage of his passing ability. Like I said, he can sometimes force tough shots, and occasionally over dribbles when quick passes are available, but for the most part he's a willing playmaker who can make all kinds of different reads, which was on full display in the NBA Finals when Miami keyed in on his scoring. It's difficult to separate his individual ability from Jokic because of how tethered their attack is, running almost everything through that two-man game, but that still requires Jamal doing so much work, not just on the ball, but away from it as well. I mentioned how good he is at shooting on the move, and he really has the entire package when playing off the ball. Constant movement, sharp cutting, even some utilization as a screener. This allows him to play so seamlessly as a number 2 guy, with the on-ball game to take on a bigger load when needed, and that hybrid capability is enough for me to call him a strong all-star on offense. Defensively, I talked about his size. He's a big guard who moves his feet well and plays with physicality, and he's also pretty good at navigating screens, which gives him some utility at the point of attack, especially against guards who aren't lightning quick. The big thing for me when it comes to Murray though is the buy-in. Denver's defense worked as well as it did in the playoffs because of the team's constant activity both on and off the ball, and he played a major part in that with lots of timely help plays, rotations, and hard closeouts. With that said, he's still someone who can occasionally be attacked individually, getting blown by a decent amount and not offering too much resistance against bigger wings. He's sometimes not very positionally sound, which leaves him vulnerable away from the ball and when defending screeners. I think he may be a neutral impact defender, but I'm leaning more towards the side of a very slight negative, which keeps him as a very solid all-star and number 22 on this list. As for 21, that spot goes to Bam Adebayo. The first thing I want to point out with Bam is how good he did against Jokic. The way he fought to prevent him from getting easy entries, either by fronting him or sticking with him through screens, and held his ground when getting back down, despite not having nearly as large a frame, just has to be applauded. But it's not even the traditional big things that make him so special, rather the versatility he offers. He's maybe the most switchable defender in the NBA, actually guarding positions 1 through 5 and doing it effectively. This is made possible by an incredibly unique physical profile. He's 6'9" with a 7'1" wingspan, but moves like a supersized guard with the way he slides his feet laterally, quickly changes directions, and shifts his momentum to slow down or speed up. That versatility serves as the driving force for Miami's style of defense come playoff time. Constant switching to always have a body in front of the ball, aggressive helping at the nail, gapping off of shooters to turn away drives and force turnovers. He's capable of executing any pick and roll coverage to near perfection, whether it's a switch, hedge and recover, blitz, ice, high drop, or deep drop. The Heat can run it and do so with success. They can also throw out some of their signature zone looks with Bam in any spot on the floor, most commonly down low because of his size and vertical pop. I will say he's not a super high level rim protector, and I do think that holds him back just a bit. He's not much of a shot blocker, not always in position to save plays in the paint, and just like I mentioned with Triple J, doesn't have the size of some other guys when it comes to making attackers think twice as a deterrent. Over the past 2 seasons, players have shot about their expected accuracy with Bam contesting at the rim, landing him in the 43rd percentile, although that number has jumped to more than 7% come playoff time, a much healthier 60th percentile. You pair his schematic versatility, along with how many positions he can cover, and his activity away from the ball as an aggressive helper, and you get a guy capable of anchoring some truly impressive playoff defenses. Since 2021, they've held opponents to about 6 points worse than their average offensive rating, a very good mark historically. Overall, I do think his limitations as a paint protector just keep him a touch below the very best defenders in the NBA, but he's right there as a serious defensive player of the year level guy and all-star level player on that end. Offensively, there are some things I really like. Miami runs through him quite a bit as an initiator in the middle of the floor, flowing into dribble handoffs or hunting for cutters, where he's a sharp passer and one of the game's best illegal screeners. As a roller, he can do a ton of things. He's an above the rim lob threat and solid finisher, can counter deep drop coverage with the mid-range game, and can take advantage of short roll situations with quick decisions as both a scorer and playmaker. This is an area of his game that I actually think hasn't been maximized. I'd love to see him next to a high-level operator in the pick and roll, or elite pull-up jump shooter that can put him in more situations attacking downhill. For his position, he has a very advanced handle, which helps him offer some legit isolation scoring. He's looking to get to that mid-range game, short pull-up jumpers or floaters, and because of his size, these are shots he can get off pretty much whenever he wants, allowing him to serve as a sort of release valve. He's one of very few bigs who can touch the ball as much as he does and help his team generate efficient offense in the playoffs, and also one of the only who can consistently play in transition, both on and off the ball. With that said, there are also some things I don't like. He has virtually no post game outside of lower percentage turnaround fades, limiting his versatility and ability to punish switches. He also doesn't create many opportunities for himself to score at the rim, attacking with the intent of scoring over defenders from the short mid-range, which can cap his efficiency. He lacks touch, especially in traffic, struggling with added contact or lengthy contests down low. And he still has moments where he's just too passive, having opportunities to attack but not taking advantage, which prevents him from ramping up the volume of his scoring. You can see that here, one of the lowest scoring rates among the players I sampled on slightly above average efficiency, which just isn't super valuable. But you do still get value from his passing, ability to initiate, the screen and roll game, and the open floor. This leaves him a decent positive on offense in my opinion, enough to make him a high-level all-star overall. Just to recap my 21 through 25, I've got Bam, Murray, Harden, Jaren, and Anthony Edwards all as all-star level players. To stay tuned with the rest of the list, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on. If you're interested in some more of my in-depth research, make sure to check out my website and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you agree and disagree with so far. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.